In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up this scene with nice blended lighting and blended materials. All the objects and content is generated in Notch, so it's really easy to put together. I'm going to show you how to set up the sphere first with all the lighting, and then I'm going to show you how to set up the rest of the primitives. So let's open up the other composition. I'm going to bring in a sphere. You can add a 3D primitive or a sphere, connect it to the root. Now I want this to be lit really realistically, so I'm going to add a path tracer and bring that in. Now the scene's gone black obviously because there's no lighting in here, so I'm going to hit Shift R and that will just show off the polygons. Now there's a couple of things I want to do. I want to add a camera and I want a big zoom factor on this, so I'm going to put this on 20, and if I go to my camera view, which is 6, and zoom out, you can see the camera's really tight on this sphere, so it's almost like 2D but it's still 3D. The other thing I need to do is, if you zoom into the sides of it, you can see the edges, and I don't want to see any edges or anything. I want this to look quite realistic, so I'm going to add on the sphere more subdivisions on X and Y, so I'm going to take that up to 80 and then zoom out and then go back to my camera view. Now you can't really see the polys on the edge. Start lighting this, so I'm going to add an area light, bring that in, connect that to the root, and those polys are from the area light, so I'm going to hit Shift R, so we go back to our lighting mode, and here is my area light. If I go back to 5 so I can see what I'm doing, bring it out and I can rotate it. Now I want the area light to always be facing the sphere, so I'm going to grab the sphere and I'm going to input that into the target node pin of the area light, so wherever I move this it'll be facing the sphere. Now let's get back to the camera. Now there's a few things I want to do, so I'm going to add a material and make this sphere blue. Go to the colour, and there you go, you've got a blue sphere. At the moment you can see where the area light's hitting, the blue colour sort of fades off here, but next to where the area light is, it's the same sort of colour, and I want more of a gradient on there. So there's a few things I have to do to the material to get that to work. So if I go to the material, I'm going to change the brightness of the actual colour because that's affecting the fall off. If I change it to 0.35, which is pretty dark, but I also want to change the specular fall off so it's a lot brighter. I'm going to change that to 2. And there's some other things I need to do, so I need to get the area light and make it brighter, so I'm going to change that to about 18. And then I need to change the shape of the light as well, so it's not so big. So we're getting more of a fall off, and to increase that fall off, if I go back to the material, I'm going to bring up the roughness quite a bit. Maybe to just under 0.6, somewhere like that. You can see there's much more of a gradient. Obviously the light's quite bright at the moment. This is a bit overpowering, so I'm going to lift it up a bit and I'm going to bring it forward. So now we're getting a much nicer, softer gradient on the actual material. I want some uplighting as well, so I'm going to copy that area light, just copy paste, and I'm going to bring it below the other area light so I know that it's the bottom one. So Control R, and I also want that to face the sphere, so I'm going to attach the sphere to the target node input on the area light, and then I'm going to lower it down, so I can just lower it down and it will automatically face up as I lower down. Now if I hit 5, go back to the orbit view, I actually want this area light to be quite long and thin. And then go back to my camera mode, you can see it lights the bottom of this much better, but I want to lower the brightness down quite a bit. Now I'm going to add some extra lights into the scene. So if I copy paste this light, move these ones over, Control R, and then again put the sphere into the target node pin, and then this light I'm going to drag down and then just move over by hand. Just bring it over here. So this light I'm going to make a sort of pinky colour. I want to move it up a bit, and then I'm going to do the same to the other side. So copy paste this light, Control R, I'm sticking it the other side so I know where my lights are, and then I'm going to get the sphere and pin it into there. So then bring this light over to the other side on position X, and I'm going to make this a bit more of a reddy orangey colour. and I want to push it back a little bit more. I think that's working quite nicely. You're already getting the nice smooth colours. I think what I will do though is this bottom one, I just want to put it in a nice position so it lights more of the bottom. And I think I might make it a bit of a blue colour. If I go to 5, my orbit view, I think it's still a little bit too thick, this. So I'm going to make it a little bit thinner. Go back to 6. That's working quite nicely. So I'm going to add some more primitives to this. Go to my orbit view, and I want to add a cylinder. And I can drag it into the scene. There's a few things I've got to do to this to make it work nicely. So I'm going to rotate it around on the axis. If I hold shift, it rotates on full angles. So I can rotate it to 90 degrees. I'm going to go to the pivot point and give it a custom pivot. So if I go to custom, I want it to pivot on this bottom pivot here. So it's going to jump up to where that pivot is. I also need to check dynamic updates. So if you change the scale of this, the pivot point stays in the same place at the bottom. So I'm going to go back to the shape of it. I'm going to increase the size. So if I hold down Alt and just pull it to the side, I'm going to increase this to about 1.4. And I'm going to shrink down the radius. And now I want this to actually sit on the surface of this sphere. So I'm going to get the placement tool, which is Y. And I'm going to sit this nicely on the top of the sphere. So I want it so it's slightly showing me the front of this cylinder. If I go back to my camera, which is 6, there is something else I want to do before we go any further. I think the setup needs to be portrait rather than landscape. So I'm going to go into the settings. If I go to project, settings, and then to rendering, 1080 there and 1920 that way. Zoom the camera out a bit, bring the sphere down a bit. There you go, so it's sitting nicely flat on the cylinder and rotated back. And you can see the end of the cylinder's got a bit of a hole in it still. So if I go to my actual cylinder, you can see that there's an inner radius that is bigger than the outer radius. So I don't want any inner radius. I'll bring that down to 0. If I go to 5 in my orbit view and then have a look at the end of this, what I want to do is add a bevel, but I also want to get rid of any visible polys. So the subdivisions X I'm going to increase to about 40. Now I'm going to increase the bevel radius and I'm going to bring it to about 0.01. So it's a little radius. If I go back to 6, so I'm going to add a material to this. So I might as well just copy paste this material. For the cylinder, I want to have a blend of material. So I'll get rid of any color in it and I'm going to get a color ramp. Bring that color ramp in and attach it to my material. And you'll see the color ramp has got a gradient, but it's from white to black. I want the color of this to be like a pink to a orange. I need to do 2 things here. I need to get a mapping node, bring that in, attach it to the material mapping, and I'm going to put it on local coordinates. Now the next thing I want to do is rotate the mapping node. So I'll rotate the rotation bank by 90, and then I'll reduce the scale down to about 0.75. Now you can see the color ramp goes from black to white. The white I want to make an orangey red color, and the black I want to make a pinky purple color. The next thing I want to do is add a few more primitives. So I'm going to add a cone. And I'm going to do the same with the cone. I'm going to go to the pivot point. I'm going to make a custom pivot point at the very bottom center. Turn on dynamic update so you can change the scale. I'm going to press placement Y. We're just going to set it on the top. If I go to 6, so we'll place it around there. Again, there's a couple of things I want to do to the actual shape of this. And there's a few things I want to do with the area light. So you can see the area light actually has a visible back face. So if I select all the area lights, I can turn off the visible surface. There you go. And now the area light is not included in the cone. So the primitive cone at the moment is quite wide and tall, so I'm going to shrink down the actual height and I'm going to reduce down the radius, and I also want to have a little bit of a bump on the apex. I'm going to increase the subdivisions. I'll take those up to about 60 so you can't see the edges on the bottom, and I also want to add a bevel radius, and I'm going to make that 0.01. So if I then press 5 and zoom in, you can see it's got a nice edge, blends in with everything. I'll go back to 6 to the camera view. I'm going to copy paste this and I'm going to apply that to the primitive cone. Now the primitive cone, I want to actually be a similar blue to this. So if I go to my color and then I can just make it a blue. I'm not too concerned about any gradients on this one, so I can get rid of the color ramp. I think I want to have this sitting slightly more forward. Select the cone, press Y and bring it forward a little bit more. I'm going to add another primitive, so I'm going to add another sphere. Might as well copy paste that sphere because it's here. Control R. Again, I'm going to go to the pivot point and I want the pivot to be custom pivot at the bottom, so I'll choose the bottom middle. Well, I'm already on Y, so I'll use that to sit that on this cylinder. And then I'll go to dynamic update. I'll just quickly show you what happens if you don't have dynamic update on. If I go to the radius and shrink it down, it just hovers in place and the pivot stays down here. So that's what the dynamic update does. So if I turn it on, it'll now be sitting on the cylinder. This primitive is going to just be a purple color, so I don't need the mapping on that either. So I'll copy paste this. I'm going to put the same material into here and I'll just make it a purple color. I'm going to add a box. So instead of 3D primitive, I can just add box. I can bring this box straight in. Again, I want the box to have a bottom pivot, so I'm going to go to 5 so we can see the pivot better. Go to custom pivot and I'm going to choose the middle bottom one. And then I want to shrink the box on a few axes, keep it quite long on X. I'm going to lower it on Y. I haven't pressed the dynamic update, do that and it will drop. And I want to make it quite narrow as well. So I'll bring it to about there. Maybe we'll shorten it a little bit. I want to sit this box on here. I'm actually going to change these axes. If I go to 6 in my camera view. So on the long axis on here, and I'm going to change the Y axis. It just works a little easier. I'm going to make it a little bit thicker. I may actually move this cone back a little bit. I want to make a gradient on the primitive box, so I'm going to copy paste the material with the gradient on it. Apply it to the primitive box. I think I'm going to have to rotate my mapping -90 to get this to work. There you go. Now we've got the gradient going from purple to red. I also want to pick up the highlights in the edge, so I'm going to add a bevel to the box as well. I'm going to make that bevel 0.018. Final shape, I want to make a cylinder that's cut in the middle. I'm going to add another cylinder, bring that in, Control R, I'm going to rotate it around and then press 5 so I can set the pivot point. If I go up to my pivots again, custom pivot, and choose the center pivot point, turn on dynamic updates, go to the place tool and place it in, get the rotation tool, go to local coordinates and I'll just rotate it around. Go to 6. This is way too big at the moment, so I'm going to shrink it down. So I'll shrink the radius down quite a bit. I'm going to shrink the inner radius down. If I go to my rotation, the cylinder is thick, so I'm going to rotate that right down. And I'm also going to up the subdivisions to 80, so you can't see any of the subdivisions. And now this is the interesting bit. I can change the start and finish angles. I'm going to bring the start angle to about here. Then the finish angle to about here. It's still a bit thick for my liking, so I'm going to shrink that down a bit and increase the inner radius a little bit, shrink the outer radius a little bit. And the final thing is to add a bevel radius of 0.01. I want another gradient on the cylinder, pretty similar to the last gradient, so I'm going to copy paste the material with that gradient on it, apply it to the cylinder. And I want that to be a sort of yellower orange going to a sort of much lighter pink colour. There you go. And I think the mapping's wrong on this. So select the mapping. I'll just rotate it back so it works properly. Now the final thing I want to do is add a background. So I'm just going to get a simple plane. Bring that in. I'm going to rotate it on world coordinate space. Hold shift. Rotate it to 90. And then I'm simply going to scale it so it fills up the back of the scene and push it away from the camera. And then I'm going to add a material and apply it to the back, but I want 3 colours for the gradient. If I go to 5, I want a darker blue at the beginning, and I want that going into a purpley, strong purple colour, and then I want that going into an orange that's quite light. If I grab my mapping node, shrink it down, now you can see the colours, and then I can rotate it to where I want it. So a little bit more scale, so it just fades out. Go back to the camera. Looking at this, it looks like the light at the top, which is this one, is a little bit too bright. So I'm going to move it up a little bit so it's not so bright. I'm just going to reduce the brightness on it slightly. I'm going to bring the rear surface a little bit closer so you get some nice shadowing. And I'm also going to go to the path tracer and turn on ray traced ambient occlusion so you get some darker areas, sort of like faked drop shadows where the contact points are in the polys. I'm also going to turn on depth of field. If I go to my camera, I can show you the depth of field. At the moment it will be defaulted to 1 for the focal blurriness. If I put that on 20, and then if I hit Control and middle mouse button, you can see that the focal distance plane has selected that edge there. It'll select wherever you click it. So I'm going to click on there, just about the middle of the screen, and then I'm going to reduce down the blurriness quite a lot. So you get a little bit of blurriness, but not too much. Another thing I want to do on the path tracer is increase the number of refines. It's currently on 200 and I want to increase it up to 400. And when I do this, it means that the image quality is going to be a lot nicer because it's had more refines on it. I'm also going to turn on the AI Intel denoiser. What it does is after the refines have stopped, it will just add some denoising using AI, which just cleans up the render even more. And the last thing I want to do, I want to add some noise over the whole scene. To do that, I'm going to use our generators and I'm going to apply them using a image 2D. So if I go to image 2D, bring that in, connect that, everything goes white. That's because it's drawing over the top of the whole scene. I'm going to get a noise generator and I'm going to get a fractal noise generator as well. I can preview the noise in the viewport by selecting the RGB function that just shows the RGB of the noise. Now the noise itself is actually one sort of noise over the whole surface, so I want to use the fractal noise to make it a bit more organic and break it up a little bit so it's not the same noise over the whole surface. So I'm going to do that through a composite source. I'm going to use the noise to drive it. I'm going to set it up with the same width and height as the actual scene. The width is 1080 and then it's 1920. One important thing to do here is turn off the animation because you don't want it animating, so it'll just make the whole thing look noisy. I'm going to get my fractal noise, pipe it into the bottom. I'm also going to make this the same width and height. It will inherit the other one, but it will inherit it square, so it will squash and stretch the fractal noise. And then in the composite source, let's see what it's doing. So at the moment, it's got the noise, and this fractal is breaking it up a bit, which is exactly what I want. But I want this fractal noise to have a bit more scale, just to break it up. And then I'm going to change the threshold a little bit, and then I'm going to change the gain a little bit as well. And then I want to change how they're multiplied together. So at the moment, they're being blended using composite, but I want to reduce the amount of blend between them. And once I've done that, the composite source is going to go into the image 2D. So I'm going to stop previewing that, open the image 2D, turn it on, and then that will just go into the texture. And I'm going to compose it over the top using lighten. And you can't see too much at the moment. Now we need to look at the noise again. So I'm going to go to the amount on the noise, have a look at that. I'm going to raise it up a little bit just so you can see a little bit more noise. And now I'm going to decrease the scale, and that will help show the noise pixels a bit better, so they're a little bit larger. I'm going to change the intensity a little bit, probably take it to about 1.6. And then we're going to go to the composition. I'll increase the blend amount a little bit, just so the fractal noise is showing up a little bit above the noise itself. Now that seems to be working a little bit better. You can see there's a nice textured noise over the top of the composition. I think that's working now. You could keep going with this for a while, but I think this is about done now. This is a very simple way of blending materials and lighting together to get a really nice soft lighting look. Hope you enjoyed this Notch tutorial. Looking forward to seeing you in the next Notch tutorial.